The topic of this video is Americanism. I have prepared the contents in three parts. Part 1 is posted here for you in this module 10. You can find part 2 and part 3 in modules 11 and 12. Now, let's come directly to the topic. So, we know that the English language originated in England and then spread around the world as far as North America, South Africa, India, Australia, and New Zealand. Over the years, due to cultural diversity among these countries or continents, the language did not remain the same. Even though English is very much mutually intelligible among native speakers, there are some distinctive features in them that make them different varieties of English. Today, if British, American, Canadian, Australian, native English speakers intermingle and have a conversation, they can tell where they are from because they will sound so obvious. It's not only in speaking because of their accents, it applies also in writing, although it may be to a lesser degree. In this respect, it will be interesting to know what makes American English different from other varieties of English. We can examine some of the differences in their pronunciation. Let's look at some of the differences in English across these countries. The native speakers of the English language. From the time that differences in the vocabulary and idiom of Americans began to be noticed, they became the subject of comment and soon of controversy. In the beginning, the comments were uniformly adverse, at least as far back as the utterances of Dr. Johnson. Often, Americans were accused of corrupting the English language by introducing new and unfamiliar words, whereas they were, in fact, only continuing to employ terms familiar in the 17th century that had become obsolete in England. When the injustice of this attitude was perceived, Americans began to defend their use of English. And with a growing sense of their position among nations, to demand parity for their speech with the English of England. Over this difference in point of view, a controversy was carried on through most of the 19th century. The first person to use the term Americanism was John Witherspoon, one of the early presidents of Princeton University. In 1781, he defined it as, quote, an use of phrases or terms or a construction of sentences, even among persons of rank and education, different from the use of the same terms or phrases or the construction of similar sentences in Great Britain, unquote. In justification of the word, he added, quote, the word Americanism, which I have coined for the purpose, is exactly similar in its formation and signification to the word Scotticism, unquote. Himself a Scot, he naturally did not look upon differences from the English of England as necessarily bad. He said, quote, it does not follow from a man's using this that he is ignorant or his discourse upon the whole inelegant. Nay, it does not follow in every case that the terms or phrases used are worse in themselves, but merely that they are of American and not of English growth, unquote. And yes, John Hancock was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson, who did not scruple to coin the word belittle, was independent without being belligerent. He objected to, quote, raising a hue and cry against every word he has not licensed. Here, where all is new, no innovation is feared which offers good. And should the language of England continue stationary, we shall probably enlarge our employment of it until its new character may separate it in name as well as in power from the mother tongue. Unquote. With most, however, the spirit of unconformity prevailed. Even so original a thinker as Franklin was ready to accept English uses as his own guide. Acknowledging a criticism of Hume's, he wrote, quote, I thank you for your friendly admonition relating to some unusual words in the pamphlet. It will be of service to me. The unshakable, too, though clear, I give up as rather low. The introducing new words where we are already possessed of old ones sufficiently expressive, I confess, must be generally wrong, as it tends to change the language. I hope with you that we shall always in America make the best English of this island our standard, and I believe it will be so. Unquote. The first dictionary of Americanisms was published in 1816 by John Pickering under the title of Vocabulary or Collection of Words and Phrases, which have been supposed to be peculiar to the United States of America. Although the work of an American, it is thoroughly English in its point of view, both in the introductory essay that accompanies it, and in the comment throughout the body of the glossary, Pickering shows clearly that he has been inspired by a desire to purify the language of his countrymen by pointing out all departures from English uses and persuading them that only by strict accord with the uses can they hope to write pure English. This attitude aroused the wrath of Noah Webster, who felt that his own position had been attacked. With a manifest effort at self control, he replied in a published letter to the Honorable John Pickering on the subject of his vocabulary in 1817. Quote, with regard to the general principle, unquote, he wrote, quote, that we must use only such words as the English use. Let me repeat that the restriction is in the nature of the thing, impracticable, and the demand that we should observe it is as improper as it is arrogant, equally impertinent as it is to ridicule us for retaining the use of genuine English words because they happen to be absolute in London or in the higher circles of life. Unquote. He said, quote, let it be further observed that the charge against the people of this country of introducing new words is to a great degree unfounded. Your own researches have proved this fact. I question whether 10 words can be found among men of reputable character in the United States which are not authorized by English uses, either general or local. But whether the number is 10 or 50 is not material. New words will be formed and used if found necessary or convenient without a license from Englishmen. Unquote. The battle was on. A much more ambitious dictionary of Americanism was published in 1848 by John R. Bartlett and greatly enlarged in a second edition of 1859. The author was for 3 years commissioner on the Mexican boundary and had an opportunity to gather many words from prairie and frontier life. considering the date at which it was compiled, it is a very commendable piece of work. In it, the older attitude of Pickering has given place almost entirely to an interest in dialect for its own sake. Bartlett refrains from controversy, and though he has no hope that quote, the pure old idiomatic English style can ever be restored in this country, unquote, he ventures the thought that we may someday have a style and a literature which will also have their own beauties and merits, although fashioned after a somewhat different model, unquote. Up to the time of the Civil War, the prevailing attitude in the United States seems to have been one of deference to English uses. In 1866, however, James Russell Lowell published in book form the second series of the Biglow Papers and supplied it with a lengthy introduction, ostensibly an exposition of the dialect in which the papers were written. This essay is in reality one of the most important contributions to the controversy over Americanism, although it had often been recognized that many of the distinctive features of American English were survivals of the older English of England. No one had been at pains to bring it together the enormous mass of evidence on the subject. Lowell filled more than 50 pages with closed packed but eminently readable parallels to American expressions, drawn from his wide reading of the older literature of England. His reputation both in his country and abroad ensured a wide public for his views. Since the appearance of this essay, the legitimacy of one large class of Americanisms has not been questioned. Those who have written most on the subject, such as Lounsbury and Brander Matthews, have generally taken Lowell's defense as a point of departure, explicitly or implicitly, and have employed their strength in combating the idea that because an expression is of American origin, it has no right to a hearing. They have preached the doctrine of American English for the American as a natural mark of intellectual sincerity. Quote, for our novelists to try to write Americanly from any motive, unquote, said William Dean Howells, quote, would be a dismal error. But being born Americans, we would have them use Americanisms whenever they serve their turn, and when their characters speak, we should like to hear them speak true American, with all the varying Tennessean, Philadelphian, Bostonian, and New York accents, unquote. What Brander Matthews, in his Americanisms and Britishisms, wrote of English criticism of American spelling has a wider significance as indicative of the contemporary attitude in America towards English authority in matters of linguistic uses. Quote, any American who chances to note the force and the fervor and the frequency of the objurgations against American spelling and the columns of the Saturday Review, for example, and of the Athenaeum, may find himself wondering as to the date of the papal bull which declared the infallibility of contemporary British orthography, and as to the place at which it was made an article of faith. Unquote. By the end of the 20th century, passionate criticisms and defenses of Americanism had given way to other concerns about language and the general attitude on both sides of the Atlantic now seems to be close to what the British author William Archer wrote a century earlier. Quote, new words are begotten by new conditions. America has enormously enriched the language. Unquote. Now we'll talk about the purist attitude, purism. The controversy over Americanism has at times been more or less connected in the United States with a purist attitude, always an element in linguistic discussions in any age. There is nothing, of course, to compel purists in America to be hostile to an American standard of purity. But as a matter of fact, they were, in the beginning, almost always identical with those who accepted English usage as a norm and believed that Americans should conform as completely as possible to it. While theoretically, the purist ideal and advocacy of the English standard are two quite distinct things, they are so often united in our guardians of a linguistic decorum that it would be difficult to separate them for purposes of discussion. Conversely, in England, at any time during the 19th century, any impurity in the language, meaning anything that the individual purist objected to, was more likely than not to be described as an Americanism. Coleridge objected to, quote, that vile and barbarous word talented, unquote, adding, quote, most of these pieces of slang come from America, unquote. Talented did not come from America, though the point of is of no consequence. Mencken tells us that scientist was denounced as an ignoble Americanism in 1890. It is well known that the word has been disliked by many in England, although it was coined in 1840 by an Englishman. That the various modifications of the English language in the United States were all gross corruptions was a belief vigorously expressed by an anonymous writer of 1800 in the monthly magazine and American Review. The article on the scheme of an American language contains an ironical preference to those who think grammars and dictionaries should be compiled by natives of the country, not of the British or English, but of the American tongue. After thus paying respect to Webster, the author states the conviction that for their standard of language Americans must look to the best educated class, whose dialect is purified by intimate intercourse with English books. Pickering, whose vocabulary of Americanisms has been mentioned above, begins his introductory essay with this statement. The preservation of the English language in its purity throughout the United States is an object deserving the attention of every American who is a friend to the literature and science of this country. This seems general enough, but after quoting several pages of extracts from English journals in condemnation of Americanisms, he adds that the language of the United States has in so many instances departed from the English standard, and our scholars should lose no time in endeavoring to restore it to its purity, and to prevent for future corruption. Okay, folks, that's all I have for this video. Thanks for watching patiently. The content of this video is drawn from your textbook, A History of the English Language, Please read the chapter English Language in America and let me know if you have any questions. The discussion on Americanism will continue in the second and third parts of the video, which are posted on Module 11 and 12. Okay, you have a nice day.